You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Season ticket holders and lifelong fans with neighborhood ties discuss Cubs news and neighborhood happenings. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 312 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. And I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin and he's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
It's a beautiful night in Wrigleyville tonight, Jeremy.
That it is, and that's the end of the positivity here. As we've got a lot.
Oh, please.
I'm kidding. We do have a tough series, a couple of series last week to discuss, and we've got roster moves. We've got a look ahead at next week's schedule, and to help us unpack all of the Cubs happenings, longtime friend of the show, Matt Trueblood. Welcome back. Thanks for taking time out to talk Cubs with us tonight.
Always a pleasure, even when it's also pain.
Well, we had to have you on today because the Cubs played the Twins in Minnesota, and
your beloved Twins, by the way, right?
And so we want to hear about that. We want to hear about you. I believe you were on site for one of these games.
Yeah, my wife she belongs to a big family. We had 33 people at the Saturday game, and I was telling all of my many gathered relatives, I can't lose today, as long as they actually play the game, which they almost didn't even do because of rain. But as long as they play, I'll take a Twins win today. Cubs just won last night. Everything will be okay. And then, it was like somewhere in the bowels of the ballpark, the monkey's paw curled. It got so ugly that you couldn't even enjoy it as a quasi-neutral. It was just brutal.
Meanwhile, in Oakland, management was saying, I wish we had fans with big families because we could use 33 people at one of our games.
Triple attendance some night.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we'll get to our thoughts on the Twins series here in a minute, but I do want to start, since last we podcasted, the Chicago Cubs played your St. Louis Cardinals.
It's hard for me to believe I was at a Cubs game 1 week ago tonight. That's
right. The Cubs and Cardinals, they lost 2 out of 3 to the Cardinals. We predicted it on last week's podcast that this could be the series that turns around the Cardinals season.
Nailed it.
Yeah, looks like it.
We were also correct in our analysis that Wilson Contreras back catching, having some catching duties with the Cardinals. So other people realize that the bad pitching may not be totally his fault. So glad to see that come around as well. But the Cardinals did take 2 out of 3.
I will say, Jeremy, in regards to the Cardinals series, because until through May 12th, which was Friday night, run differential mattered. That was a stat that we kept. We no longer keep that stat, but we did at the time. And in the Cardinals series, while the Cubs may have lost 2 out of 3, Pyrrhic victories are what they are. They did outscore the Cardinals by 2 runs in the series because of the 10-4 Man of Steel game on Wednesday, where the Cubs unleashed a 10-run assault on the Cardinals after losing 2 close games earlier in the previous 2 days.
Matt, your thoughts on the Cardinal series overall? Anything that we can take away from that before what we saw in Minnesota?
I mean, I think it was a microcosm of what has been now fully half of the season they've played so far has looked just like that.
Yeah.
They're 8-15 over their last 23, and it keeps taking that shape. When they play blowout games, other than these last 2, they have tended to win them, but they can't win close games. And I'm as familiar with the sabermetrics of it all as anybody, I promise. I don't fully buy it in this particular way. There are things about the roster construction, things about the way the roster is being deployed, and then just basic failures that I don't trust to stop anytime super soon that are preventing them from winning close games right now in a systematic way. And so that Cardinal series put a perfect bow on this. It came right on the heels of 10 games in a row against the Nationals and Marlins when you had to make hay. You had to. And they didn't, for the exact same reasons that we saw play out against St. Louis.
They lost 4 out of 6 to Miami, but they did outscore Miami.
Yeah.
So extra credit. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. We looked at the schedule. We knew it was going to get tough. We knew the Miami watch. That's why when we were predicting like a bullish 5-2 against Washington and Miami on the swing back after losing the first 3, we thought, okay, we held our own against the Dodgers and Padres, but after crushing Oakland. But now it's time to take care of business against these teams, because then we've got the Cardinals. No matter what place they're in, they're going to be pesky because of the pact they made with the devil many years ago. And then you knew that after that, the Cubs were going to play basically a month's worth of games against teams over 500, with the exception of a 3-game set with Cincinnati. But we're talking about, the Phillies and the Mets and Houston and Tampa and at San Diego. And, these are not at LA. These are not games to trifle with. Like, these are like tough games against tough opponents. So
Tampa Bay
Cubs had to do something. Yeah, right. And they came out this week, and while even in our expectations, and I think we were somewhat optimistic, we thought I thought 3-3 was, was at least, we had to at least tread water. I think I said, and that would have been 3-3. You, Jeremy, predicted the Cubs would go 2-4. Congratulations, you win. We lose.
I take no joy in my prediction.
But that Cardinals series was a tough one, starting with that first game on Monday. I did it. I was in attendance. I did give my tip of the cap to Wilson Contreras, who then repaid me by going 2 for 4 with 2 RBIs and a run scored. So he accounted for all 3 Cardinal runs in the game. And Stroman pitched well, but not well enough, because the Cubs only had 5 hits and only scored 1 run. And that has been, I think, a repeating pattern over the last week or so. The Cubs, lost, I think, at one point 3 of their last 5 losses up to that point. Like, 3 of them had been by 1 run, and that's, or 3 of them had been games where the Cubs only scored 1 run. Sorry, you got to score more than a run, and then and then of course we saw the series devolve because in the second game. The Cubs, Taillon, was not sharp and gave up 4 runs, which is all it took to beat the Cubs, although he wasn't even actually the losing pitcher in the game. But, and then they came back and they crushed the Cardinals in the third game, and they walk away from the series thinking, you know what, we're better than them, but we lost 2 out of 3 at home. And we only play them at home 1 more time the rest of the year. And that's in July. And after that, we don't play them again. So, when you start looking at, the division and long term, these are series when you want to win the 2 out of 3. I don't know. It's a little frustrating for me.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I mean, all of that. And within that are a lot of different branches we could go into, but I want to lock in on the offense is just not, the margin for error is too small to credibly expect to win series against good teams right now. And that's by design. So we can fault the front office for that in this way. They went and built this pitching and defense team. Well, that's great. But then when your pitching and defense falters, if you only built a pitching and defense team and didn't also build that great team that blows teams out, Jed, then this is what happens. You go into these fallow periods and you're just not going to hold on in those close games, especially if you built sort of a hodgepodge of a bullpen and handed it to a manager who's used to having a real push button 7th inning guy, 8th inning guy, 9th inning guy kind of bullpen.
By the way, Jeremy, do you remember the last question I asked Sarah on our Sunday podcast last week?
I don't. I'm sure it was insightful.
I thought it was insightful. My last question to her, and I think, as it turns out, was kind of it could have been a good news story, but maybe it wasn't, but it was better than nothing. Last thing I said to her was, "What about Christopher Morel? When's he coming up?" And at the time, we thought we weren't thinking like in 8 hours,
Right.
I guess, which is what he. But I look back at that series when we're predicting. I said, "Oh, we'll tread water and go 3-3." That was predicated on not having Christian Morel for any of those games. And thank God they did bring him up, because but for him, it would have been even worse.
I was going to say, this man is not the problem.
To Matt's point, the Cubs have we've been talking, whether it's Mervis or Morel or whomever, about how the Cubs seem to be kind of handcuffing themselves by playing inferior players when there are better players in the organization. This was an example of, he'll cool off eventually, but when it's night and day. Like, Nick Madrigal hasn't hit, all of his hits combined didn't go as far as the one Morel homer in Minnesota, let alone the two Morel homers in Minnesota, which I think combined for about 870 feet. Eric Hosmer can't do that. What have we been doing for a quarter of the season, right? Like playing guys who just fundamentally can't do that on a team that desperately, desperately needs somebody who can hit the ball out of the infield or even out of the park, ideally, which is what Morel has proven now in his first 5 or 6 games that he can do.
4 home runs already. Right? 4 home runs.
Right,
as of the time of this recording. Could be more by the time.
So it's that kind of thing. And it feels like almost like a stubbornness not to do this. But, we've talked on the podcast about how a team like this that doesn't have a lot of margin for error, because talent-wise, we all came into the season thinking this was, at best, maybe a 500 team. They started off hot. We're like, well, maybe it's going to be a little bit better than that. And there were the predictors of, some people were like, oh, it'll be an 87-win team or whatever. And that seemed a bit much. But all of that needed to be based on a team that was not like sacrificing wins. And it feels like this team has kind of intentionally not I don't want to say you don't play to win, but they haven't put the best people on the field all year long, and they can't afford to do that. They among all teams can't afford to do that, because their players aren't that good in the first place. So if you don't play your best ones and you lose 3 or 4 games in April and May that you should have won, that's really hard for a team like this to make up, I think, over the course of the year, and that's concerning to me.
Matt, you hit it. You hit the nail right on the head when you said this is a front office roster construction issue, and how a guy like Christopher Morel is not on this team coming out of spring training, or when he's lighting it up down in AAA. It took him this long. It took Eric Hosmer having just a horrible series in Washington for them to finally pull the trigger on Mervis. And while his power hasn't come around yet, you see these two guys and just what it could have been earlier in the season if you had these guys getting that experience earlier on and being here with the team weeks ago.
Yeah. And I want to draw a distinction too. I think it's, 2014 is a very good example. Even the very beginning of 2015, when they were so infamously manipulating service time, those were situations where it was like, this team's almost ready to contend, but we're withholding talent in the name of some longer term scheme, right? This year, it's a different thing. It's sort of a surprising thing, I think, because when we think about the differences between Jed and Theo, the narrative, the perception, a big storyline in Chicago media, even behind the scenes, is Theo walked away because he didn't want to have to be the one to press the big red button on that last wave of players. He was emotionally attached. He was invested. Jed was willing to be more ruthless all throughout this process, to be more calculating. I think all of that has some truth to it, except we got to this point right here, spring training of this year and even back into the offseason a little bit. And Jed started trying to be an alchemist. And I'm not totally disparaging the idea of clubhouse chemistry or, the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. But he tried really hard to do that with this roster. That's how it feels to me, at least. Like, he was not holding back Chris Morel and Matt Mervis to buy back control years or, because he could get Eric Hosmer for the league minimum and that might be a nifty arbitrage trick. It wasn't like that. He thought, and the front office writ large, and certainly the coaching staff, David Ross at the head, thought these veteran leaders are going to be important to holding this team together through the early going. I think that was the idea. But it feels like they outsmarted themselves, doesn't it? Maybe some of those personalities were redundant. Maybe that power just isn't in those particular individuals to the extent they thought. They made some kind of miscalculation there. They had good reasons for sending, Mervis hadn't really had that much time at AAA. Morel did have something to prove in terms of catching up to fastballs in the zone and not swinging through them at a catastrophic rate like he did last year. He had to make some adjustments. There were decent reasons to send those guys to Iowa. I'm not sure they did those things for those good, salient baseball-only reasons. I think they thought they were building this sort of magical vibes clubhouse, and I don't think that worked at all. And now we're seeing already the impact that Morel's energy has on the team. So they might have totally missed an opportunity just from that soft factors perspective to have somebody in there making waves and change sooner.
This organization has shown more loyalty to Eric Hosmer than they ever did to Anthony Rizzo. Full stop.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much just like veteran capital attached to that dude. And from the outside, I don't think we'll ever be able to explain, defend, falsify any of it. It just doesn't. There are definitely plenty of people in the game, in and outside the Cubs organization, who think having him in your clubhouse and on your bench and in your dugout helps. But
did it help?
I don't know, man. Yeah, I mean, frankly, coaching staffs these days are big enough and staffed with dudes similar enough to Eric Hosmer that you just shouldn't need a second one of them. You've got Mike Napoli and Andy Green. If you still need Eric Hosmer, one of those guys isn't doing their job right. I think.
Took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah, that's exactly.
When the Bulls were in their championship run, they had a guy on the team named Jack Haley, who was basically what player on the team? He was on the roster. He was Rodman's like body man, basically, to keep him calm for the whole season. Guy never played a minute, but he had that effect on the team. But at least the Bulls, who were trying to win the championship, didn't say, well, I guess we got to play Jack 10 minutes a game then because he's on the team. And I kind of feel like that's where we're at with Hosmer. Like there was this desire, this need to play him every day or almost every day until they just couldn't anymore. And, it's one thing to have a guy, whether he's a coach or even a player, who's kind of Hosmer, the reason the Cubs have Hosmer at all is because no one else wanted him and they got him for the league minimum, for God's sake. And that doesn't mean there's no, this feeling that they had to play him so much. I don't know where that comes from. I don't know what in the organization, what did they feel like they owed him in that regard? I don't get that at all. I'm not saying he can't be on the roster, but why does he have to start every day? And that, one of many things that's been frustrating.
Yeah, I think part of getting him on the roster was promising him some amount of playing time or an opportunity to prove or disprove himself. That's just based on right when they signed him. That's what Jed and Ross said. And I think that's something you only do if it was also part of the conversations you had with the player. Because otherwise, You don't overpromise to a guy who's being brought in under the circumstances he was.
I guess you'd have to define, prove yourself.
Right.
In the context of those conversations.
And that's where another issue crops up is I think we're, we talked, it was before the season started, might have even been during the actual off season that I was on with you guys and we were talking about how we evaluate Ross at this point. And we really hadn't maybe had a fair chance to do it up till then because of the talent he'd been handed the last couple of years. These first couple of months have been his first serious, unmitigated trial as, what do we really have here in terms of, is he the manager to get them back over the hump and into contention? And something's missing, right? We can debate about what it is, whether it's there's not quite the right power balance or communication between him and the front office, or he just has too much loyalty to veterans like he had to Hayward the last couple of years and to Hosmer this year, and that just goes completely unfettered. Whether there are things that they're passing on to him that he's doing a poor job of implementing, but situations keep running away from him. He keeps drawing out lineups that make you really scratch your head. And so, yeah, that's where the mistake, if it was a mistake to bring Hosmer in, it gets compounded by the manager playing him too much. So
here's my hot take, by the way, on David Ross. And it happened on Mother's Day of all days. And it was not about him losing a game. It wasn't about, playing the wrong players or anything. It was the most trivial thing you can think of, but it was, I guess, the culmination. The old expression, like the straw that breaks the camel's back. This was, for me, straw. It was a light straw, but a straw nonetheless. I'm watching the game with my parents were over, and my dad and I were watching, and with 2 outs in the 8th inning against the Twins, down 11-3, the Cubs decide to take Fulmer out of the game, who'd been struggling. He gave up 3 hits and only gotten 2 outs. And they brought in Mastroeni to pitch. And, first of all, I have this pet peeve about position players pitching, but that's a whole nother topic. And he just gets crushed, and he gives up 5 runs before he can get just the 1 out to end the game. And I kept saying, as it was going, it was embarrassing, right? The Cubs were it was super embarrassing, and it was, basically just sort of like I don't know if you want to call it some kind of like some amateur, like, hour show. But I thought at that moment, Ross, for God's sake, you have 2 out. You need 1 more out, and then you don't have to pitch anybody else the rest of the game. Just leave Fulmer in and let him get the last out. He's a grown man, like let him get the last out, as opposed to pulling him so you can bring your second baseman or shortstop, wherever the hell Mastroeni is, into the game to then allow 5 more runs to score. It just pissed me off. And I said, you know what? Turn to my dad. I'm like, you know what? If they let Ross go at the end of the year, I'm fine with that. It's sort of the way I looked at it. I just was so disgusted with the whole thing. And it obviously it had nothing to do with the outcome of the game, but it was just the last for me. I was so pissed.
Yeah, because all those lineup decisions, all of those bullpen maneuvers, all of the stuff that there's not a single game where you're not questioning something that he's doing or saying what is going on, and you see things like even today, Happ is batting 3rd against a lefty, and you're like, okay, is that? Did the metrics tell you this is a great idea? Like what are we doing here?
No, the metrics did not tell you that, actually. Probably, I don't think.
Yeah, so you have all of these David Ross moments throughout the year where you scratch your head and you say, why is he making these decisions? What is the thought process here? And yeah, we get
and my greatest fear, Jeremy, is that when he bats Happ, in that, like, against a lefty like that, he's doing because in his mind, deep down in his mind, he's like, yeah, we'll get him going against lefties by putting him in the heart of the order. I have this feeling that, like, that's what he's thinking.
Well, look, and in his defense, the front office just paid Ian Happ like a full-time, middle of the order player. And I wasn't entirely against that, but it probably isn't something I would have done, for the specific reason that even last year, when he had his, very much reshaped season in terms of the kind of value he provides, but a really good overall season, a lot of his success against lefties was just BABIP luck, man. He does not. And here's the thing, Boog, if you're listening, Boog Shambi,
He's
I
a
love
listener.
you, dude. You have to stop saying that no matter which side he's batting from, Ian has a good approach. He doesn't. He has a really good approach against righties from the left side. He has a terrible approach from the right side against lefties. He strikes out a ton. He walks never. He gets to no power, and he doesn't lift the ball. His mechanics are bad, and he doesn't know what pitch to look for to work with the bad mechanics he's built. He's a victim of success that was fake in the first place last year against lefties, because now he's kind of locked himself into something that was never actually ameliorated. So they've got to, and right now, it's kind of keep patching things together until you get Horner back. But if Nico Horner gets back and you've still got Happ batting third against lefties when you've got Morel on the team, and Patrick Wisdom, who's still on pace for like 50 homers, and he keeps batting 6th, 7th, 8th, we're going to have to seriously interrogate that choice too. So yeah, the stuff is really adding up. And, to your point about him putting in Mastroboni at the end of that blowout, it's just, for me, it's not even a move like that exactly, although I hear where you're coming from. But I was told the big upside to David Ross, the manager, is he's the same guy every day. The team's going to be the same team every day. The team's going to have no quit. The team's going to always be scrapping back. The team's going to play 9 innings. I don't see that from this team.
No.
That goes back to last year and long stretches of 2021 too. They don't play with a lot of pride. There will be these multi-game stretches where they are getting their doors blown off and they look lackadaisical. They get really sloppy in the field. There are pitchers throwing pitches that feel like capitulations because they just can't figure out how to get a guy out. And some of that is talent. The guy they got on the mound tonight, Jamison Tyone, he's doing a lot, like, to figure some new things out. They brought him in because they believe in some things he does and that they could add to some things he does. And he's a tinkerer and he's trying to add new pitches to his repertoire. I get all of that. He doesn't miss bats easily. It's fine. But he gives in sometimes at just the worst possible moment. And then games get away from you and the team does not fight back.
Like the Cardinals game he pitched last week.
Yeah. And I don't know. It's a lot of the stuff that I didn't even worry about that much. I worried a lot about the strategic stuff because he'd never been a manager before when the Cubs hired him. Although now he's in his 4th season, so that stuff should be cleaning itself up by now.
What do you think Michael Fulmer feels like, though, when he's on the mound and he's 1 out away from just getting out of this awful game where you're down 11-3, and the manager comes out and pulls you for a position player, who then gives up, by the way, 1 of your earned runs in addition to 3 of his own.
Right.
I mean, at some point, I'd be like, come on, man. Like, if you're going to – I'm better than that. Like, let me finish the game out. What difference does it make?
And by the way, that was the second time that weekend that he kind of had his head knocked in by a team that he was interested in re-signing with this winter.
Yeah.
Only he wanted to be a starter for them. So now he probably came to Target Field feeling about as much like a fool as Wilson Contreras felt like when he walked into Wrigley for the first time on Monday. Only the Twins made him feel even dumber by the time he left. So yeah, I don't know, that's another problem to add to the stack, is the veteran arms in the bullpen right now are hard to have faith in. And they put Boxberger on the injured list today, so that
mercifully,
yeah. And it's a forearm strain, which is funny because you can go on the IL with a forearm strain and it can lead to Tommy John, like, really easily, or it could just as easily be, and from the, if you want to interpret what they said today, it sounds a little more like a phantom IL. Like, what's really strange is
like, even if he had no forearm whatsoever,
yeah,
I could see putting him on the IL for a forearm injury at this point.
Yeah, and we'll get to all the roster moves in a minute. I do want to close this discussion out on the Twins weekend here. The Friday game, Christopher Morel, another big home run for him, and the Cubs with a victory. And
can I just say one thing about the Friday game, Jeremy?
Yeah, I love the Friday game.
Okay,
it was great. Talk about it for a while.
I'm watching the Friday game, and yeah, that was a great game for the Cubs, right? And remember when they brought Alzolay in? I think it was he pitched the 7th and 8th innings, and he pitched well. Got the double play from Carlos Correa. I think that was him. But Joey Gallo came up with the man in a situation. I think there's a man on, and at the time, because don't forget the Cubs scored 3 in the 9th. So when Alzolay came in, it was a 3-2 game. The Cubs were up 3-2, and he just made him look silly. And I remember watching Gallo when he struck out. I'm like, how does that guy ever get on base? Because the league hasn't completely figured out. Like, he's got his swing has like the whole side that you could drive a semi truck through, and he's definitely retirable as a batter. And I kind of chuckled to myself, not realizing what I had done, which was curse the Cubs, because then, of course, over the next 2 days, he looks like Babe Ruth. So I apologize. Sorry.
Yeah, the game was great, and what else was great was I thought I might be in the minority. I wanted to take the temperature of the podcast audience, so make sure you let us know your thoughts on Twitter. Tell us what you thought of the Apple TV broadcast. I am a huge fan of the actual broadcast itself. I'm watching on Apple TV Plus, and I am watching 60 FPS. I'm watching a fantastic picture. I'm seeing tasteful graphics, useful statistics. I'm enjoying the heck out of this broadcast. And I believe I texted you, Pat, and I said, Marquis should be embarrassed that their broadcast with all the graphics and just even the box in the corner and all this stuff, just the presentation alone looked so much cleaner, nicer, classier on the Apple TV. I appreciated the broadcast.
I honestly wondered if Steven Spielberg was producing it, because it looked so sharp and so nice. I mean, I could do without Dontrell Willis, I guess, but announcers aside, the actual production qualities were fantastic, and the layout is fantastic. And they didn't spend a lot of time on sideline reporters and split screens and other things that get kind of annoying. It was just a really well done, sharp looking broadcast, I thought.
Matt, what did you think? Are we in the minority here? Because I know that it's the Apple TV Plus broadcast is divisive.
Yeah, well, I think most people mostly talk about broadcasts in terms of the commentators and what they say. And I find Apple TV to be as inconsistent and unpredictable in that way as every other national broadcast.
Yep.
But I agree with you about just the visual presentation. I swear they're doing something different with color balance and brightness. And some of it is just the picture quality, like you talked about. They're making an effort to deliver it in higher resolution than MLB.TV's streams. But it really, they seem to be consciously adding visual drama to it. Which I do like. It's cool. It's different, but I think different is a good thing. Like, if we're going to have a Friday night national showcase, it should have a sort of do this instead of going to the movies kind of vibe.
There was a time, Matt, back before your time, when Monday Night Football was the only non-Sunday daytime football game of the week. And it was like a big deal, and they had extra cameras and different angles and things that, it had that kind of feel to it to me. It was almost like, wow, this is just so much different than what you see in all the other broadcasts.
Yeah, and I think they're doing that well. There's some stuff that's goofy. Honestly, they do those in the corner of the screen. They have probability of getting on base from this, at this specific juncture of the at bat, and it changes based on the count and stuff. Except they're wildly wrong, and they even move in the wrong directions based on the progress of the count. Like, a batter will take a ball and their expected on base percentage will go down by 20%. And I'm like, what are you talking about? If your motto is telling you that, no matter how advanced it is, throw it completely out and start over. And it drives me a little nuts. But that's, all the, not thankfully the marquee broadcasts yet, but all of the Bally Sports podcasts or broadcasts are also infected by live lines and stuff. So I'll overlook it. Overall, I do like sort of the presentation of it, and I'm okay with them continuing to experiment. At least they're not doing what ESPN and Peacock won't stop doing, which is interviewing players while they're playing. That drives me up the wall.
Nothing like listening to A-Rod talk to a player during a game. It's like, please do this at a bar after the game.
Even back when A-Rod was playing, no one wanted to talk to him on the field.
Right, yeah. And now they have to because they're hooked up to a mic.
The Twins overall, Matt, this is a good team. They beat up the Cubs pretty bad, and they seem like if with Correa heating up here, this team's got not a lot of competition in their division.
Yeah, I do want to emphasize for people who don't know the American League all that well, or especially the AL Central, the Twins are good. I picked them before the season to win the AL pennant. Now that was a dark horse pick. I'm almost alone in that. And even since then, they've lost one of their starters to Tommy John surgery. But you saw it. Not only when the bats have been mostly cold, and the Cubs kind of came to town just at the wrong time when eventually this team had to turn it around offensively. So the Cubs caught the wrong end of that. When the bats are going, it's a really good overall offense. The pitching has been good from day one because it's just they've invested a lot, not in free agent dollars, but in trade capital, in building a really impressive rotation. They're pretty good at, the pitch design development type of stuff. They've got flaws like every team other than the Dodgers and Rays does, but they've put together a good unit there. And part of the reason that the Cubs couldn't even keep those last two games competitive was flaws in the lineup that we've already talked about. Another part is the Twins can pitch, and they showed that off a little bit this weekend. So
kudos to the Twins organization, by the way, for turning Sonny Gray in year 10 from a pretty good starting pitcher into Sandy Koufax.
Yeah.
Year 10, Jesus.
I know, right? They can pitch, and it is frustrating. We talked on the podcast last week about this series and on my trepidation over the Twins, because no matter how poorly they're hitting, and no matter, when you do a quick scan of the stats, and Carlos Correa hitting 193 and Buxton's hitting 215, and at the time Gallo was probably hitting about 110. You look at that lineup and you're like, oh, we'll be able to take these guys. I mean, they'll be able to score 2 runs against us. You knew that wasn't going to happen, but I wasn't expecting to get blown out twice. But I definitely felt that the Twins, especially in Minnesota, were going to be a tricky team to deal with, and we saw that firsthand, apparently.
The Cubs are a 500 team. Most of us predicted that they'd be they're just under 500 at the time of this recording, and
2 games under 500.
Most of us predicted that they would be a sub 500 team here on this podcast. That they would be in the 79 to 82 win range. However, we look ahead to the week that will be for the Cubs, playing in Houston at the time of this recording. And they've got 2 more after tonight's game in Houston, followed by 3 at Philadelphia. This team's already not a good road team. They're at least 500 at home. I worry this could get out of hand here with these 6 games before we podcast again. This is a tough road trip. What do you think about as someone who watches a lot of these AL teams here, Matt? The Houston series here for the Cubs. What what are the Cubs up against here for the next 2 games after this?
I mean, the bad news is you kind of have the same thing going with the Astros, and for that matter with the Phillies, that they had going with the Twins and even with the Cardinals before that, where it's like you're getting this team that is kind of been having a rough time, at least on one side of the ledger, in some cases on both, but their talent's far above that. So you might just be the team that comes to town and, oh, this is when everything clicks for that team, and there's not a lot you can do about that. I mean, these 2 teams they're playing starting tonight were the contenders in the World Series last year. So it's like what you're walking into. And the fact that the records don't reflect that kind of only makes you more nervous. I will say there are some legitimate issues with the Astros. The Cubs almost gave up Jose Abreu's first homer of the year tonight, but he still actually doesn't have one here in mid-May. So maybe they dodged a bullet by not spending $60 million on him. I think their pitching is weakened by the departure of Justin Verlander, but also by some injuries. Their lineup is thinner because of Abreu not really working out so far and Jose Altuve still being out with the hand. You get the same vibe when you roll into Philadelphia this weekend. It's like, yeah, this team's underachieving. Yeah, you might be the team they sort of lash out and get right against, just like the Twins just did to you. But also, the team is genuinely incomplete a little bit. So take advantage of that. In these 6 games, it's not implausible to win 3 and lose 3. I think the problem is by having already lost 1 series on this stretch, and in fact, having lost 4 of your last 5 series, you kind of need to string together a couple of series wins in a row. And this doesn't set up well to do that because you're going into 2 of the toughest environments in baseball to play as a road team. And you got to come out with 2 out of 3 in each. That's unlikely. But I do think a split is possible just because these teams are not yet what they're hoping they'll be come June, July, August as everybody rolls back into the lineup.
And the Cubs do send Steele out and Smiley to finish the Houston series. So,
and the Cubs are shorthanded too. They're playing without Brad Boxberger. So,
we'll get to the injuries and rosters
Horner.
In a second. I do want to get predictions in real quick, and then we'll move to the roster changes. So, predictions for the week, Pat. Why don't you lead us off?
So my prediction is 3-3. I think that's an optimistic prediction. I think 2-4 would not make anyone flinch, but it's the optimist in me, and the fact that the Cubs really need to win at least 3 of these games, probably not a good reason to predict it. But yeah, and also baseball's a weird game, right? Things tend to even out. Some luck or whatever tends to even out. I see the Cubs playing 500 against these 2 teams, but it's not going to be easy.
I'm leaning 2-4. Matt, where are you prediction wise for the week for the Cubs?
I'll say 3-3 as well, just because you're going to get 2 Justin Steele starts in there, because from every indication Ross gave today, with Wesneski going down to Iowa, they're going to skip his rotation spot, and you'll see Steele start Tuesday and Sunday. That helps. It also, just like Pat said, like they need these wins. This weekend, Horner's, it sounds like, going to be back in the lineup. We started to see, and not only does Morel add something, but we started to see Seiya Suzuki get that power back online this weekend. That was the one big positive takeaway I have from the Twin series is he thrashed a couple of balls. And I've been in his corner this whole time saying the at-bats are a lot better than you guys on Twitter are making it sound like they are. He's not delivering what you need him to deliver, maybe, but he's been better than you're giving him credit for, hanging in at bats, fighting off good pitches, coming up with big hits with runners on. And now we're starting to see, as his timing gets right and he starts to anticipate better how pitchers are attacking him, the power's starting to show up. I think that's going to continue this week, and those things collected, I think they can get to 3-3. If they don't, we're going to be having some really, or I won't be back next week, but you guys will be having some really moribund conversations on here if they lose both of these series. So,
hey, real quick before we get to, I don't want to get too off track, but since you brought up Suzuki and I was going to bring him up later anyway, he missed spring training, so he got a late start. He didn't really get back to the team until that Oakland series when he went nuts to start the season for him. And then he went into the doldrums after that and was really – I almost brought this up last week, but I held off because I felt that the sample size was still too small. But had he had another week like that this week, I felt that it would have been necessary to raise the alarm bells. He's had a little over, 100, 103, 105, I guess, plate appearances. He did hit the ball a little bit better against Twins, it felt like to me this weekend, hit the home run finally. But his WAR is still 0 for the season, and we are a quarter of the way through it, even if he's more like 20% of the way through his season. And I'm guardedly optimistic, I guess, after this week. But boy, the Cubs desperately need for him to be better than a 0 WAR player. I mean, he's preseason we talked about this. Jeremy and I talked about this. In fact, Matt, you did too. In the offseason, we were all bullish on Suzuki. We thought he would lead the team in on-base plus slugging percentage. We thought he was going to be a catalyst. He'd figure things out in year 2 that, in year 1 when he was so up and down, adjusting to the big leagues and the injury he had. We just thought this was going to be the year he put it all together. And we are 40 games into the season, and it's not too late, but is there any reason to be worried at this point for you, or I know you're optimistic like we are, but if you're looking at it objectively, should we be concerned?
Just like the analytics side, looking at the swing and looking at the numbers, I think those are the best reasons to be optimistic. That's why I'm, my optimism about him is rooted in, I see a lot
science.
Of good signs. Like, dude hits the ball hard. He is not, and he doesn't actually hammer it into, there's been this narrative that, he's not getting the lift he needs. That is true in a sense. His hardest contact hasn't tended to be in the air so far this year, but he's not like, not even so much him this year, but think a couple of years ago when Hosmer was hitting the ball hard, but it was always straight into the ground. So it's like, what does 108 off the back get you if it has a negative 3-degree launch angle? That's not say it. He does lift the ball and he does hit it hard. He has not been doing both on the same pitches enough to this point. The bigger problem, because that, to me, that stuff will even and sort of iron out. The bigger issue is that he's been too patient so far in his entire MLB career. He's not swinging enough for his contact profile. He's a guy who's always going to have some swing and miss. And he swings at about 10% of first pitches in plate appearances. Going to have to be more aggressive than that because you're falling behind too often for a guy who's going to swing and miss even once you get to 2 strikes at not a high rate, but an above average or an average rate. You can't be getting into 2 strike counts more often than almost anyone else in the league if you're going to swing and miss even an average amount in those situations, unless you're counterbalancing that with elite power, which we know
he strikes out over a quarter of the time.
Right.
But you're right. He only has 16 homers and 562 plate appearances.
Exactly. And so he's drawing enough walks because walks are a byproduct of that patience. But I'm in the camp right now of saying you have patience and you're adding to it a little bit of passivity. And you got to get rid of that. And you've got to start. I think it's been a long adjustment period just because of the disruptions. The shortened spring training his first year because of the lockout, the injuries he suffered last year that sort of chunked up his season, the injury that cut out his spring training this year. I think it's been a long period of him trying to figure out what pitches he can hit in this league that operates at a higher velocity than on average than NPB, and also how pitchers are going to attack him. And he's trying to do all that figuring out by taking pitches. That's just his mode of learning and seeing, and I don't have a huge problem with that as a process. But we need to now get to the end of that process, and we need to start seeing the power come around. I feel very confident it's going to. I see the swing. I see the approach. I see the adjustments he makes when he does guess right on what a guy's going to throw to him. Some of the clutch hits he's had are, I know what this guy's trying to do to me. I'm going to sit on that pitch and hit that pitch hard to the part of the field that pitch type and location allows me to do. There are way too many guys in the league now who can't do that seemingly simple thing on a consistent basis. Seiya can, but he's just not quite been able to guess right often enough to this point, or to read and react early in counts the way he's going to need to be a consistently, 120, 125 OPS plus type of guy. I think we're almost there where it's going to start being consistent, high-level production. If I'm wrong, they're in huge trouble, and I've certainly been wrong before, but
Well, don't be wrong this time.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of hesitation, to be honest. I'm sure I sound overconfident. I just feel very confident about Seiya. So that's one thing I'm not particularly sweating right now. Give me 3 weeks, and if we're not seeing more of what this past series in Minnesota looked like, then we can talk about, is there a bigger issue at play? But
the Cubs are preparing for 3 weeks from now by doing a series of roster moves, getting ready to deal with the players that are injured now, coming off of injury, that are here, that need to stay. You've got Brad Boxberger going to the 15-day IL, which we talked about earlier with the forearm strain. Jeremiah Estrada, pitcher, is recalled, and Hayden Wisniewski optioned to AAA. Nick Birdie selected from Iowa, and Adrian Sampson transferred to the 60-day IL, opening up a spot on the 40-man. Matt, these are 2 questions from me, and then we'll get a question or two in from Pat, and then we will call it a podcast. But these moves, we've got more moves to come. Nico Horner is gonna return to this lineup. He was running the bases before the game in Houston today. We'll see Nico Horner back. We're gonna see Kyle Hendricks returning shortly, and eventually we will get Cody Hoyer back at pitching as well. Of the guys returning, one, who's going to have the most impact for this team, Kyle Hendricks or Cody Hoyer, in your opinion? And 2, do we see Wisniewski back anytime soon, or is he going to be stuck down in AAA until an injury happens?
All right. I don't know. Are you guys following off screen here the game that's happening right now as we're podcasting?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes, but we're not going to admit that.
So I'm going to say, and listeners, I will do what Pat's unwilling to and tell you that at this moment, it's the top of the 8th, and the Cubs just gave up 2 runs to fall behind 6-4 in this game against Houston because David Ross used Michael Fulmer in the bottom of the 7th.
Wasn't Master? Oh, because Master Boney was too tired from pitching yesterday. See, I knew this would happen.
And if you can't trust Jeremiah Estrada in the 7th inning, it's not like I'm asking you to use him in the 9th. In the 7th inning of a game, knowing if you can't trust him more than Michael Fulmer, whose confidence has to be shot right now, and with whom there is clearly something wrong, or if not wrong, then he just needs to be cut. If you're going to use Fulmer instead of Estrada in a spot like that, why should I believe you're going to use Cody Hoyer in any kind of impactful way when you bring him back off of basically 2 years gone from doing anything? No,
fairness,
I don't.
They did use Estrada in the 7th inning after Fulmer gave up the 2 runs. Estrada came in, threw 1 pitch, retired the side, and the inning was over. But yes, your point still stands.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I don't know why, but that makes it so much worse. At this moment, I have so little faith in David Ross, the bullpen manager, so non-existent faith that it'll be great if Cody Hoyer comes up and is everything. It'll be great if, at mid-season they somehow convert Ben Brown to that kind of role and he takes off, or Daniel Palencia, or if Nick Birdie miraculously turns out to be someone David can find it in his heart to trust. Awesome. Until then, I'm going to assume that for whatever reason, he only trusts dudes who have been relievers before and is going to keep running Fulmer or Boxberger out there in high leverage situations until their arms fall off and the Cubs' hopes follow them to the operating table.
Well, he's halfway there. One of their arms fell off, but
yeah,
we've got one guy to go.
And only a quarter of the way through the season, so he's ahead of the curve. Yeah, I'm saying Kyle Hendricks to your first question. I think he's going to settle in, and, I'm always inclined to believe more in Kyle Hendricks than I should, because I believe less in the utility of raw velocity than most people do, which I know is weird. That the evidence is piled up against me on that, whatever. I still believe what Hendricks does should work as long as he's fully healthy, which we've rarely seen him be over the last 2.5 years now. If he is, then I think at least short term, he's going to be very helpful. And I think Hayden Wesneski will be back. I identified these issues, the issues that he's struggling with last year, even as he was having a great September. There was this departure between his release points on his various pitch types. He was going to have to reconcile them. When he did, it was going to change the movement profile on his fastballs. That was going to create issues. It's created even more issues than I probably would have expected. But yeah, dude's got stuff to work on. I'm not surprised he's got stuff to work on. I thought they'd have been able to better sort of work him through it at the major league level.
Pitch labs and all.
Yeah. So I think he'll be back, but I think this sojourn in Iowa is probably good for him.
By the way, when it comes to Kyle Hendricks, I don't know about you two, but I root so hard for Kyle Hendricks that I'm afraid that when he comes back, it's kind of like watching your own kid competing in sports. You know how your heart's in your throat? You just so desperately want things to go well. I so desperately want him to be able to pitch at least for like 3.5, 4 months this season and pitch well in his last season with the Cubs as sort of like the symbolic, vestige of the World Series and NLC championship runs. He's done so much for this team. He's done so well. I was at that Game 7 against the Dodgers, or Game 6 against the Dodgers, when he just completely stood up Kershaw and won the game. And I so desperately don't want to see another repeat of that Braves game on Sunday night last year when he gives up 6 home runs in the first inning and the third. And so I hope you're right, Matt, on that one. I would love for him to pitch like he did on opening day against the Brewers last year, when he just 6 shutout innings here or there, give up a couple runs, 6 innings, 2 runs, whatever, but just not get completely annihilated. That would be my desire. Knock on wood.
Yeah.
Let him go out with some dignity and respect, right?
Pat, any last questions for Matt before we call it a podcast?
One last question, Matt. So you may or may not know this, but the Cubs are currently 4th in all of baseball in batting average. That hasn't always amounted to runs scored. The Cubs are actually, although they're not that far behind in runs scored, they're I think 10th or so in the league. My question to you is, do you fear that as the Cubs go up against better pitchers, they've got Nola coming up this week, and then they got Scherzer against New York, having played some lesser pitchers over the last month, do you see that changing? Do you see the Cubs having a harder time getting hits? And if so, how is that going to impact a team that already doesn't hit for much power in terms of their ability to score runs moving forward against better teams?
Yeah. I don't think their true talent is quite that high, even in batting average, if you just isolate that skill. They also have kind of tried to trade in a little bit of their average upside for a little bit more slug. That's part of what adding Morel and Mervis in place of Hosmer, and eventually you're hoping Morel sort of replaces at bats that Madrigal was taking. Well, you might see your batting average deflate a little, but hopefully you're getting more punch out of that. So they're trying to make a little bit of that exchange anyway. And I think you're right that the pitching matchups are going to push things that way. I still believe that the top of this lineup can be pretty productive, especially against right-handed pitching, because that's where Ian is useful. They're going to need to continue to be aggressive. Early in the year, they were running a lot. And then I think partially just because they were having some offensive success in terms of hits and even doubles and homers real early, they stopped running and stopped sort of pushing the envelope that way. They're going to have to turn that switch back on again. And hopefully Nico's legs are healthy enough for him to continue to do that the way he was early on. Hopefully you can get Morel on base enough that he can start to agitate on the bases a bit. And Cody Bellinger's been really good on the bases. I got no complaints there. I just want to see that continue.
And Suzuki's back too, right? So you've got better athletes, I guess, in the lineup.
Yes. And that's overall, I think this offense is, if you mentally leap ahead to Friday when hopefully Horner's back, I think this offense is already materially better than the one that began the year. So that one that began the year outperformed its true talent, but that overperformance might be the true talent level of this new group, not necessarily in batting average, but in terms of overall production. That's got to be the hope, because at this point, you're not expecting another big reinforcement. And that's maybe the scary part at this point, is just other than possibly bringing Miguel Amaya back, or if he continues really raking, around August, you could talk about, is it time to promote Pete Crow Armstrong and add him to this mix? But you're probably not expecting another big infusion of young talent. The guys who are here now just have to produce more like what they're capable of. And I do think batting average has to fall off a bit, because these guys got to start picking out pitches they can drive more. I think Trey Mancini, last I checked, was hitting like 260, or 265, which is great for Trey Mancini. And also, he's slugging like 360, and that's a huge problem. So I need you to trade a little bit of that contact for power. And that's what they're trying to do at a personnel level too, by swapping in Morel more often. So
that's what they got him for, was the power. I mean,
yeah, in theory, and he was supposed to be such a great fit for left center at Wrigley, and he is. I mean, honestly, the version of Trey Mancini that has always shown up when he's healthy can do that. He just has not done it so far this year, and that's a massive problem that we haven't gotten to talk enough about, just because there have been too many other problems to encounter, too many more obvious fixes. So,
and time flies when we're having fun talking Cubs with Matt. Thanks again for coming on. Please remind all of our listeners where they can find your work on the internet.
Yeah, mostly it is. I'm going to skip trying to cram in every possible thing. Northsidebaseball.com. It's a Cubs forums, news articles daily. Not only would I love for you to come read, sign up at the site, join our comments section. We run a monthly update of our top prospects, and there's a prospect tracker. It's a great website, great community that's built up there, that's been there for 2 decades, and we're just sort of reviving the part of the website that operates more like a news or a blog type of thing. But I also love, if you're listening to this, you care enough about the Cubs that I'd love for you to come right there with me. We've got a small group of writers. We've been slowly building out since we launched the site right around opening day. And we're still looking for folks to do that, to join us in that. We can't pay much, but what we can pay, we will. And we'd love to get, some people's eyes on your thoughts about the Cubs and just get more good conversations started. We're having a good time with it, and I think it's only going to keep rising. Even if
you had a great article today, by the way, on Cody Bellinger for people.
Yeah, well,
go check it out.
Another thing where the signals are certainly mixed, but that's the kind of stuff we want to deliver and give room for people to have good, nuanced, multi-level Cubs conversations. So
excellent. Yes, make sure you check out his website, and you can follow us on Twitter at WrigleyvilleNat. Same for Instagram, Facebook.com/WrigleyvilleNation. Support the show by telling all your Cub fan friends about how to subscribe to the podcast. All the links to subscribe, the entire back catalog, everything, every way you can support the show is available at the website WrigleyvilleNation.com. And with that, we're calling it a podcast. So thanks, everyone, for listening. Pat, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks again, everyone, and we'll talk to you again next time.